A Bond of Flame, Dragon Riders of Osnen, Book 2. Written by Richard Fierce. Narrated by Andrew McDermott. Chapter 1. The Necrid Desert stretched like an affliction as far as I could see. Nothing but rolling hills of dark sand and heat. Every so often a gust of wind would blow over the caravan, but it did little to bring any reprieve from the high temperature, and when the breeze left as quickly as it appeared, it always made things worse by leaving me with a mouthful of gritty sand. I trudged alongside a massive wooden cart that contained something valuable, though I didn't know what it was. The man who had hired me as a guard didn't provide any information other than where they were going and how much he was paying. I suspected it was some sort of animal. There were odd noises that often came from within the cart, and I'd seen the caravan leader toss a pig inside. At this point, I was forced to take any job that kept me moving. I didn't know if Master Peeves had dragoons searching for me, but I wasn't going to take any chances by staying in one place too long. Besides, I was tracking down every rumour I'd heard about unbonded dragons. In the month since my escape from the Citadel, I'd travelled hundreds of miles. Every time I thought I was getting close to finding something, it turned out to be an unsubstantiated claim, or simple farmers who didn't know the difference between a dragon and a large bird. My suspicions that Master Peeves had lied about where the school got their dragons grew with every failure. I lifted my canteen and drank sparingly of the warm water that remained. Our trip across the desert had taken several days longer than planned, and our supplies were running low. I licked my parched lips and heaved a sigh as I felt sand grinding between my toes. After this job was done, I didn't want to see another desert for a very long time. A droplet of sweat dripped down my forehead and into my eye before I could wipe it away, temporarily blinding me. I muttered to myself as I used the hem of my shirt to wipe my eye, vainly trying to use a portion that had the least amount of sand on it. Moments like this provided the only excitement on this trip. The master of the caravan had made guarding his cart seem like it was going to be highly dangerous. The only danger I had seen so far was a rattlesnake, and it had steered clear of our small group. "Sand devil!" The alarmed cry broke the monotony like shattered glass. I quickly drew my blade and looked for the scout who cried the warning. It was Jeff. He was roughly 100 yards from the main caravan, standing atop a hill. He waved his arms frantically. I had never seen a sand devil before, but the other guards had tried to describe one a few days ago. When the creature topped the hill, my eyes widened in disbelief. It was a lizard-like creature, roughly 10 feet in length. Along its back were spines that rose 2 feet in height, though they were covered with a large flap of skin that made the spines appear to be a fin. It moved quickly, gaining on Jeff faster than I would have expected. Another guard, Vance, sprinted ahead. Adrenaline started to course through me, and I followed after Vance. Running was made difficult as the sand shifted beneath my boots, but we arrived just as the sand devil was snapping at Jeff's heels. Vance weaved to the right and jabbed his spear into the creature's side, but it was covered in thick scales, and the strike didn't pierce through. "Take the other side," Vance yelled at me. I moved to the creature's left side and kept my sword up and ready. Now that it was outnumbered, the sand devil backstepped defensively, but kept its gaze on Jeff. "What did you do to make him so angry?" Vance asked jokingly. "I think it smells Jeff abruptly stopped talking at a glare from Vance. "Yeah, I know what it's after," Vance said lowly. His grip on the spear tightened. "And it'll have to kill us all before it gets anywhere near it." I assumed they were talking about whatever was in the cart. My palms were sweating, and the hilt of my sword was starting to slip from my grasp. I cursed my mangled hand and quickly brushed my palm along my pant leg. That was all the sand devil needed. It whipped around in a circle, slamming its tail forcefully into Vance. The blow sent the man tumbling into the sand. The sand devil opened its maw wide and charged me. My feet faltered in the sand as I tried to move out of the creature's reach, and I fell onto my knees. The sand devil screeched madly as its heavy body crashed into me, throwing me face first into the sand. I gasped, the air forced from my lungs, and tried to get out from under the beast. It felt as if a large stone was on top of me, and it was impossible to get free. Panic started to set in. I struggled to breathe, not only from the weight atop me, but also from my head being buried in the sand. Just as my vision started to become fuzzy, the weight of the beast was removed. I rolled onto my back and inhaled precious air, then looked around to see what was happening. Vance had drawn the sand devil's attention and was keeping it at bay by thrusting at it with his spear. Jeff was lying in the sand, unmoving. I struggled to my feet and retrieved my sword from the sand, then hurried over to Jeff. He was breathing, and he wasn't wounded from what I could see, but he still needed to be looked over by the old wizard who doubled as a healer. I turned back toward Vance. "How do we kill this thing?" I asked. "Its scales are too strong," Vance replied. "We can only pierce the flesh of its belly. We'll have to find a way to flip it onto its back." "That seems impossible," I said, shaking my head. "Very few things are impossible." The sand devil charged him suddenly. Vance threw himself to the side, narrowly escaping the mouthful of sharp teeth that tried to bite him. As I watched the beast move, I noticed that the spiny fin on its back swayed back and forth in opposition to the rest of its body. An idea formed in my mind, but I hoped it wouldn't get me killed. "Get ready," I shouted. Then I tossed my sword down and sprinted straight toward the sand devil's right side. When only a few strides remained between us, I leapt into the air and balled myself up, then crashed into its fin. The creature roared in surprise. I was briefly satisfied to feel the sand devil tip over beneath me until it continued in a roll and crushed me beneath it again. Thankfully, this time I was face up, but I was unable to move. I didn't bother to struggle, knowing it was futile, and I was relieved when I heard the sand devil cry out in agony instead of anger. I felt the vibration of a few thumps as Vance struck the creature over and over. When the sand devil stopped moving, I felt someone grab a hold of my hand and pull me out from under the beast. It was Vance. He pulled me up onto my feet and I rubbed my lower back. "You're crazier than you look," he said with a grin. "How'd you know that would work?" "I didn't," I admitted. "It was a gamble." Vance chuckled, and we walked around the dead sand devil. There were multiple puncture wounds in its underbelly, and Vance's spear protruded out of it. "We should get Jeff back to the healer," I said. "Agreed." We each grabbed an end of the prone man and carried him back to the caravan. The leader instructed us to put him into the wizard's cart, and we left Jeff in the care of the withered old man. Vance shared a private conversation with the leader, Rory, and I headed back to where the sand devil was. I inspected the odd creature, looking over its armoured scales and running my fingers over them. They were smooth, but hard as steel. I heard someone approaching and looked over my shoulder to see Vance. "Is it possible to make a shield or something with its scales?" I asked, nodding toward the sand devil. "Possibly," Vance replied, "though I've never seen it done before." I stared at the creature thoughtfully. "Rory said the camels need a break from pulling the carts, so we're going to make camp here for the night." "Who's taking the first watch?" I asked. "I will. You can take the next one, and if Jeff isn't seriously injured, he can go last." "Sounds like a plan," I said. "While the others set up camp, I need your help." "With what?" "With preparing dinner," Vance said, with a knowing look at the sand devil. Chapter 2. After Vance and I had cut the sand devil open and separated the edible meat from the scales and skin, We put the meat in a large pan and left it cooking over an open flame. I would never have guessed that a sand devil could be eaten, but the scent that wafted throughout the camp as the meat cooked left little doubt in my mind that it would be delicious. "You never want to eat this," Vance said. He held up a roundish organ that he'd pulled from the sand devil's insides. "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know the real name of it, but I call it a poison ball. It's full of some kind of toxic liquid. If you eat it, you'll be sick as a dog for at least a week." "What are you going to do with it?" Vance held it away from his body and used his other hand to slice through the top of the organ with a dagger. A foul odour immediately assaulted my nostrils. I coughed and covered my mouth and nose. "With a smell like that, who in their right mind would eat it?" I asked. "You'd be surprised what you'd do when you're starving. Anyway, the liquid inside wards off other sand devils. I guess that stench it gives off serves as a warning that there's a larger predator in the area. If there are any other sand devils around, it'll keep them away." I followed Vance as he walked around the perimeter of the camp and poured some of the liquid out at various points. The liquid was a deep purple, almost black, and reminded me of the disgusting potion I drank for my test at the Citadel. I tried not to think about that place, but sometimes a memory would come to my mind, and I couldn't help but entertain it. There were many things I missed about the school, but there was only one person that I hoped to see again. "What did you do before coming out here?" Vance asked, breaking my reverie. He tossed the empty organ down and knelt long enough to grab a handful of sand, then rubbed his hands together. "I did a few small jobs, similar to this," I replied. "What about before that? Before you started hiring your sword out?" I remained silent for a moment. I doubted Vance was a servant of Master Peeves, but I also didn't want people to know that I had failed out of the school. "I lived at my father's estate," I replied, trying to be vague. "What brought you out on the road?" I shrugged. "I wanted to get out and see what was to be seen, I suppose. My father's been dead for years, and my mother passed away a couple of months ago. That's what really pushed me out of the door. It was difficult being around everything that reminded me of her." Vance nodded. "I'm sorry to hear about your loss," he replied. "I can understand why that would bring you out into the world." We walked back to the cooking fire, and Vance stirred the meat. He plucked a piece out of the pan and blew on it several times, then put it into his mouth. "It's done," he announced. Then he started scooping the meat into wooden bowls. Once the other members of the caravan had been served, Vance and I sat in the sand around the fire. The sun was setting, and darkness was quickly enveloping the desert. I took a bite of the meat and found it was tender and moist, but the flavour was a bit lacking. "What about you?" I asked. "What did you do before working with Rory?" "I was a soldier in the King's army." When I'd first met Vance, I had assumed he might have a military background by his leadership style. He was tall and muscular, and had cropped brown hair edged with a touch of grey, and a thin moustache. Jeff stepped out of the wizard's cart and joined us at the fire. He was more like me in stature, but he had the same hairstyle Vance did, though his hair was black. We were all lowborns. "How you holding up?" Vance asked him. "I'm fine," he replied. "The blasted sand devil just took me by surprise." "Good. You've got the third watch, unless you don't feel up to it." "I can do it." We ate in silence for a moment. Then Vance started chuckling to himself. "What are you laughing at?" Jeff asked curiously. "You missed Eldwin's performance earlier. He literally threw himself at the sand devil." "You what?" Jeff said, turning his gaze on me. "Are you insane?" "He might be," Vance replied. "No, I don't think so." "It worked," I said simply, shrugging again. "That it did," Vance said. Jeff smiled and shook his head. "What about you?" I asked him. What did you do before working with Rory?" "Nothing exciting, that's for sure," Jeff said. "I worked for a noble, managing his accounts and finances." "Tell him what made you leave such an easy gig," Vance said. Jeff rolled his eyes. "I got in trouble with the noble." "Tell him the rest of the story." Fine. I got caught sleeping with his daughter. He found us and threatened to kill me if I didn't get far away from him and her." "That's quite a tale," I said. "Did you have any training before joining Rory?" "Not much," Jeff admitted. "I'd messed around with some soldiers at the local barracks, but I wasn't a serious study. Vance has practically taught me everything I know." "It's true," Vance said. "He was a terrible swordsman." I laughed. "Well, I'm not much better, I'm sure. My father taught me some before he died, but I haven't had any formal lessons or anything." The thing I liked about Vance, besides his general personality, was that he didn't look at my mangled hand like most people did. When he'd hired me, he didn't doubt when I told him I could handle a blade despite my flaw. "Maybe if you stay on after this job, I'll teach you a few things as well," Vance offered. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. The sun was gone, and aside from the cooking fire and some candles glowing within the carts, it was completely dark now. "I'm off to watch the perimeter," Vance said. "You two, get some rest." He left and Jeff stood up. "I'm going to sleep. See you in a few hours." I was alone by the fire. The other caravan members were either in their carts asleep or preparing to sleep. I reached into my coin purse and withdrew the silver coin I'd received in my first test at the Citadel. The firelight gave it a dull glow. As with my quest to find an unbonded dragon, I was no closer to finding out what importance the coin had, or why I had received it. I put the coin back into my purse and stared up at the dark sky. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, Vance was standing over me, nudging me with his boot. I sat up and brushed the sand out of my hair. "All quiet so far," he said quietly. "I think it's going to be a quiet night." "Those are the best kind," I replied as I got to my feet. I adjusted my clothes and strapped my sword belt around my waist. "Is Jeff taking the third watch?" "Yes. He seemed in good health to me, so there's no reason he can't watch the desert sand for a few hours." I nodded and wandered away from the camp. Although I'd only been asleep for a few hours, I felt refreshed and was wide awake. There was a chill in the air, and I shivered. The desert was an odd place. During the day, it was so hot that it felt like your flesh would melt right off. But at night, it was cold enough to warrant warm clothes. Rory had given me a thick robe for such nights, but I decided to be stubborn and not retrieve it from the community cart. I walked along the perimeter of the camp, staring out at the vast landscape. There were no sounds, and no movement that I could see. I was ready to get back to civilization. Earlier, I'd overheard Rory telling Vance that we were still 5 days away from our destination. I sighed and continued on my walk around the camp. It was quiet and uneventful for the next few hours. The chill grew stronger as the night progressed, so I stopped at the community cart and grabbed my robe. As I was heading back towards the perimeter, I heard a noise near the cart that housed the animal we were delivering. I drew my sword and quietly made my way closer. When I was roughly 10 feet away, I saw Rory. He was dragging what remained of the Sand Devil's corpse into the cart. I sheathed my blade and was about to leave when Rory stepped out of the cart and shut the door. He startled when he saw me. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Sorry," I said. "I'm on watch and I heard something, but it was just you." "Oh." His defensiveness faded. "Well, carry on." I nodded and went on my way, but curiosity was beginning to claw its way through my mind. That made 2 animals I had seen Rory put in the cart. Whatever was in there was clearly a carnivore. After walking around the camp 3 times, I couldn't contain myself. I walked to the cart where the animal was and pressed my ear to the wooden wall. It was faint, but I could hear heavy breathing. Whatever it was, it sounded big. I looked at Rory's cart. It was an insane idea, but perhaps Jeff had been right when he asked if I was insane. Perhaps I was. I snuck inside Rory's cart and found his ring of keys on a hook beside his bed. He was snoring loudly, but I made sure to be as quiet as possible. I lifted the ring off the hook and palmed all of the keys, then gripped them tightly so they didn't jingle at all. I jogged back to the other cart and quickly unlocked the door. Something stirred within, but I ignored my fear and slowly opened the door. Time ceased, and my heart surely must have skipped a beat. Inside was a dragon. Chapter 3. The dragon was smaller than any of the ones I had seen at the citadel, which led me to believe this one was young. A glowing ball of light hovered near the ceiling of the cart, casting a pale luminescence that made the dragon's red scales glint ominously. I couldn't believe it. I'd been searching for a dragon for a month, and now there was one right here in front of me. It stared at me without moving. Scattered on the floor in front of it were bones of various shapes and sizes, obvious remnants from its meals. My heart was pounding in my chest. I looked around to make sure no one was around. Then I slowly climbed into the cart and pulled the door almost fully closed. The dragon backed itself into the end of the cart, and a deep growl rumbled in its chest. I lifted my hands to show I wasn't doing anything, then lowered myself to the floor. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. It seemed stupid to say that to such a powerful creature, but it was clearly distrustful and possibly afraid. It remained guarded, but after it saw that I wasn't getting any closer, it stopped growling. When I was younger, there was a feral cat that I had befriended with tons of patience and small morsels of meat. Perhaps the same tactic would work for a dragon. We spent a long while together in silence. I didn't want to leave the dragon, but it was too risky to stay longer. Besides, I was supposed to be on watch. If something happened, I wouldn't have any excuse for not raising the alarm. Regretfully, I rose to my feet and backed out of the cart, then closed and locked the door. I returned the keys to Rory's cart, then finished my watch and woke Jeff so he could take over. There were still a few hours before dawn, but I was too excited to sleep. Despite my excitement, however, there was one question hovering at the edge of my mind. Where was Rory taking this dragon, and where had he gotten it? I couldn't ask him, of course, or he'd know I'd taken his keys. That would not only cause me to lose my job, but I'd be forced away from the caravan, and none of my questions would be answered. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep. When I awoke, most of the other caravan members were already up and eating breakfast. I accepted a bowl of fried eggs from Vance. The portion was larger than it had been the last few days, and I looked at him questioningly. "The Sun Devil's meat extended our supplies," he said, reading my expression. I nodded and ate while I watched the others pack up and prepare to continue the trek across the desert. Before long, it was almost impossible to tell that we had even set up camp to begin with. It was my turn to be a scout, so I belted on my sword and emptied my boots of sand, then headed in front of the caravan and put some distance between us. The landscape was rolling hills of dark sand. There was a steady breeze blowing, and I was forced to pull my collar over my nose and mouth to keep them protected. As I marched up and down the hills, I admired the wavy lines that the wind had formed in the dunes. I stayed aware of my surroundings, watching out for any other sand devils, but I must have gotten too far ahead of the caravan. "Eldwin!" I turned around to see Jeff waving. He motioned for me to come closer, so I walked back toward him. Sweat was dripping down his face, and I realised he must have been running to catch up to me. "What is it?" I asked, suddenly worried something had happened. "One of the carts is stuck in the sand. We need everyone to try and push it free." Relief settled over me, and we walked back to the caravan in silence. It was easier for me not to speak, which made my throat dry and made me want to drink the rest of my water. We arrived back at the caravan, and I saw the problem. The cart the dragon was in had sunk into the sand, burying the wheels at least 6 inches. It was apparent they had already tried to use the camels to pull it free, but hadn't had any luck. The sand was littered with hoofprints. "You left us in the dust," Vance said as I approached. He smirked, clearly thinking himself clever. "Sorry," I replied. "We're going to have to push the cart, and I figured every available body would increase our chances. The sand is soft in this spot for some reason." Vance took charge of the group and positioned everyone where he thought they would help the most. We heaved and pushed over and over, but the cart simply wouldn't budge. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the sun was high overhead when Vance let us take a break. Everyone collapsed in the sand, thankful for the respite. "Why don't you just let whatever is inside out until we get the cart free?" someone asked. Vance cast the man a look that made his answer evident. The man shrugged and let his head drop into the sand. I decided to ask Vance a few questions to see if I could determine where we were going. As far as I knew, the Citadel was the only school anywhere near our location, and if I showed up back there would only be trouble. I didn't want to risk my freedom. "How much longer before we get where we're going?" "Rory said we're 5 days out yesterday, but if we can't get this cart moving, then it'll be longer than that." "How does he know where we're going?" I waved at the landscape around us. "There's nothing out here that tells us anything. We could be travelling in circles for all we know." Vance shook his head. "We're not going in circles. The old wizard he employs has a magical device that's leading us to our destination. I assume that's also how he knows how many days of travel we have left." "The marvels of magic," I said. "Indeed." "Why can't the wizard just magically pick up the cart and move it?" "I asked Rory the same question," Vance replied. "Apparently his magic has limits." That was interesting. Back at the Citadel, Marin hadn't mentioned any limits to her magical power. "So, where is our destination anyway?" Vance stared at me for a moment, and I was afraid he knew what I was up to. He opened his canteen and took a small sip, then returned it to his belt. "We're going to the border of Osnen," he finally said. I nodded nonchalantly. "Autumnwick?" I asked. "No." That gave me pause. It did make sense that we weren't going to Autumnwick, since it was in a slightly different direction. But if they weren't taking the dragon to the Citadel, where were they going? I decided not to press my luck. "Ready to try again?" I asked, nodding to the cart. "Yeah, we need to get moving. We're already running behind schedule. Rory's been complaining that the extra days he has to pay everyone is cutting into his profits." "That's understandable," I said. Vance ordered everyone onto their feet, and we tried pushing the cart again. It still wouldn't budge. "Anyone have any ideas?" Vance asked. A few people offered ridiculous concepts, all of which Vance turned down. While they were going back and forth, I spotted something in the distance. It was brightly coloured and appeared to be coming in our direction, though it wasn't very fast. "Vance," I said, interrupting his irritated tirade at an unlucky man whose idea sounded plausible to me. "Yeah? Any idea what that is?" I pointed in the distance. Vance came to stand beside me and shielded his eyes against the sun. He stared in the direction I pointed and then laughed. "If I'm not mistaken, that's a Dajah." "A what?" I asked. "A Dajah. They roam remote areas by themselves, offering goods that you don't see in the vendor stalls of cities." "They wander the desert alone. Isn't that dangerous?" "For people like you and I, yes, but their people have kept that tradition for generations. They know the desert like no one else. It seemed crazy to imagine, but I had seen a lot of curious things since leaving the citadel. Someone wandering the desert by themselves was much less odd compared to some of the other things I'd seen. A while later, the Tajar reached our caravan. He was riding a camel and halted the animal, then issued a command, and the camel lowered itself to the ground. The man slid off its back and looked at the stuck cart. He said something in another language, and Vance replied in the same tongue. They held a short conversation, and the Tajar motioned with his hands several times. Finally, Vance bowed to the man, and then ordered everyone to start digging a path in front of the wheels. "What's going on?" I asked. "The Tajar says the ground is soft because there's water below. If we dig trenches in front of the wheels, we can lay some boards down and get back onto the normal sand." "Clever," I said. "What kind of things do they trade?" "Go find out for yourself," Vance replied. "We've got enough hands to dig the trenches." "Are you sure?" "If I wasn't, I wouldn't have told you to go look." "Fair enough," I replied. "Do I need you to translate?" "No. Tajar speak most languages fairly well." Vance walked to the cart and started helping the others with the digging. As we didn't have spades, they were digging the trenches by hand. I waved at the Tajar as I approached. "Greetings," the man said cheerily. He was wearing a bright orange turban on his head, and his robe was a deep indigo colour, the material thin and flowing. His beard was white and hung at least a foot off his chin. "Greetings," I replied. "What kind of items do you have?" "Are you looking for something specific?" "Not really," I answered. The Tajar pulled a small chest off the camel's back and set it in the sand, then opened the lid. Inside was a myriad of items, from bundles of brightly coloured cloth to small trinkets and carvings. One thing in particular caught my interest. It was a small box with the image of a dragon etched on the top. "May I?" "Of course," the Tajar said. I reached inside and picked up the box. It was the size of my hand, from fingertip to wrist, and hardly weighed anything at all. A small dial protruded from the back. I regarded it curiously, not sure what it was. "Turn the dial and open it," the Tajar bade. The dial made a soft clicking sound as I turned it, and when I opened the lid, soothing music began to play. Inside, a small figurine of a dragon with a rider moved up and down, as if in flight. The craftsmanship was amazing, and the dragon even had detailed scales. "Do you accept money?" I asked. "I prefer trading items, but I do accept payment if there is nothing to trade." "How much would be acceptable?" I asked, afraid the price would be more than I had. "Make me an offer," the Tajar said, his smile never leaving his face. I dug into my coin purse and pulled out everything. The silver coin and 3 gold pieces were all I had. I stared at the silver coin for a moment, hesitating. It had no value to me, and I hadn't figured out its purpose. I held it up for the Tajar's inspection. "What about this?" The Tajar's eyes widened momentarily, and then he shook his head vigorously. "I cannot accept such a coin," he said. "The music box does not come close to the same value." The Tajar looked behind me at the caravan members and leaned close. "I shall give you the box freely, if I may impart some wisdom." I nodded. "Keep that coin until the right time, and only relinquish it when it is asked of you." Chapter 4. After the Tajar's cryptic wisdom, he offered his wares to the other members of the caravan and departed, heading in the direction we'd come from. His instructions for getting the cart free worked, but we didn't travel very far before it was time to set up camp again. Before discovering the dragon, it would have irritated me to be stuck in the desert another day, but now I was looking forward to my time on watch. I knew it was crazy, but I planned on visiting the dragon again. Aside from being Rory's right hand, Vance was also the self-proclaimed chef of the caravan, and he fried up more of the sand devil meat for dinner. I ate my fill, but I kept a large piece of meat to take into the cart with me later. I hid it inside my coin purse when no one was looking, then played the music box while I sat by the cooking fire. When I first saw the box, it had immediately brought Maren to mind. I hoped to see her again someday, though I had no idea what circumstances would bring us together. Whenever that day came, I planned to give her the music box. Once the music stopped playing, I closed the lid and put the box in the community cart with my other meagre belongings, which consisted of the robe Rory had given me, a blue tunic and a black pair of pants. "Jeff's taking the first watch tonight," Vance told me as I returned to my place by the fire. "You'll take second again, and I'll go last. I traded the Dja for a rare bottle of spirits, and I'll need the extra time to sleep it off." "It's well deserved," I said. "No disrespect to Rory, but without you, this caravan wouldn't be half of what it is." "I appreciate that," Vance replied with a nod. "It's a tough job to be sure, but someone has to do it. And in a place like this," he motioned to the desert, "people's lives are at stake, so it has to be done well." "Go enjoy your spirits," I said. "Jeff and I can take care of things." Vance stood up and offered a mock bow, then disappeared into Rory's wagon. Once the sun had set, Jeff took up his post and I laid by the fire and waited impatiently for the time to pass. I dozed in and out of sleep. The air wasn't as cold as the previous night, and the fire kept the ground under me nice and warm. When Jeff woke me, I checked my coin purse to make sure the meat hadn't fallen out. It was still there, though it was pressed a little flat. I'd need to wipe the grease off my coins later, but I wasn't worried about that now. I walked a few laps around the perimeter and waited until the drunken laughter in Rory's wagon had faded. Once the camp was silent, I retrieved the keys to the dragon's cart and snuck inside. Just as before, the dragon shrunk back to the end of the cart and growled. "It's all right," I said, moving slowly and keeping my hands in plain sight. "I have something for you." There was an uneasiness in the dragon's gaze, but it tilted its head curiously. I reached into my coin purse and removed the meat. The dragon's nostrils flared open briefly. I knew they had an exceptional sense of smell, and I was sure that it could pick up the scent of the spices Vance had added to the meat. I took slow steps toward the dragon, holding the meat out in front of me. The dragon watched me intently, but it was no longer growling. I paused a few feet from the beast and kept my arm out, hoping the dragon would come near enough for me to touch it. The dragon seemed to scowl at me, so I tossed the morsel into the air. Quicker than I expected, the dragon snaked forward and caught the meat in mid-air, then regarded me expectantly. "Sorry, it's all I have," I said. The dragon growled again, but it was a different tone this time. "I can bring more tomorrow," I offered. The dragon blinked, its eyelids thin and almost transparent. I sat on the floor, pushing a few bones out of the way, and stared up at the dragon. I remembered Maren telling me that dragons could communicate telepathically, even with humans they weren't bonded to. As much as I wanted that to happen, I doubted the dragon felt familiar enough with me to do that. It was impossible to tell if the dragon was male or female. The scales that covered its neck and underbelly were a light bronze, which made its red scales stand out in beautiful contrast. Its claws were sharp as swords, but they weren't very long. Unless the dragon was merely small in stature, I was certain that it was fairly young. "Where are they taking you?" I whispered. The dragon didn't answer. The next 2 nights went much the same. I saved some of my food, and when it was my turn for guard duty, I would wait until everyone was asleep, and then spend time with the dragon. I wanted to believe that it was enjoying my presence, especially since it didn't see anyone other than Rory, and he only opened the cart occasionally to toss in a meal. We hadn't had any other issues, and the last 2 days we had made up some lost time. Rory was confident that we had only 2 days left. That didn't sit well with me, not now that I had found a dragon. In the back of my mind, I'd been trying to figure out how I might be able to stay with the dragon. I had no idea where they were delivering it, or who had bought it, but I didn't want to leave its side. "I wish I knew what to call you," I said. "You're very strong-looking. Perhaps I could give you a nickname of my own. Maybe Blaze. It fits your colour." The dragon snorted in reply. "You don't like that one? What about Inferno?" Another snort. "Flame?" "You do know I'm not a male, don't you?" I was so surprised at hearing the dragon's voice in my mind, I almost fell over in shock. It was definitely not a male. Her telepathic voice was soothing and gentle, more like a whisper than anything, and it didn't feel intrusive at all. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say. "I just assumed." My face flushed warm with embarrassment. "I can come up with something better," I said. "There's no need for you to name me. I already have a name." The voice grew hesitant, and I felt a wave of indecision wash over me. She was afraid to share her name. I could understand her fear, even if I couldn't relate to it. Rory had kept her locked up inside the cart, and who knows where she had been kept before that. I had worked hard to earn a sliver of her trust over the last few days, but even so, she seemed full of uncertainty. "I'll go first," I offered. "My name is Eldwin. Eldwin Baines." A rush of emotions overwhelmed me, all of them from the dragon. I grew dizzy from the onslaught and closed my eyes, trying to build a mental wall around myself. "I'm sorry," the dragon said. "I'm not used to the kindness you've shown me. My name is—" There was a long pause, but I could still feel her inside my mind. "Scion." "That's beautiful," I said. "That's the short version. The long version is unpronounceable in the human tongue. It means quiet one." "I am honoured that you have shared your name with me," I said. "Truly." "I hope that I have not made a mistake by doing so." There was something powerful drawing me to Scion, some sort of invisible force that made me reach out my hand. Scion started to back away, then stopped. Her emotions funneled into my mind, and I realized she felt the same force. Her curiosity grew, and she leaned her head in close. An uncontrollable tremor ran through my mangled arm as it got closer to touching her. There were only a few inches between us, and I closed the distance and laid my hand on her scaly nose. A whirlwind of things happened all at once. First, a burning sensation ripped across my palm. I sucked in a breath, but the pain faded quickly. Then my vision blurred, and it felt like I was floating, though I was still on the floor of the cart. Another rush of emotions from Scion overwhelmed me, and I cried out involuntarily. Dark memories, full of sadness, came next. I felt tears slide down my cheeks. As everything within me calmed, the invisible force released me, and my hand slipped off Scion's nose. I collapsed onto my back and saw Scion's face looking down at me, her eyes filled with watery tears. Before I could say anything, a familiar voice broke the silence. "You fool!" My head lolled to the side, my muscles weak. It was Rory. Chapter 5. "What are you doing in here?" Rory demanded angrily. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt parched, like I hadn't had water in days. I had difficulty understanding what was happening. Rory stomped into the cart and grabbed me by the front of my shirt. then jerked me onto my feet and dragged me out of the cart. My legs didn't cooperate with my mind, and I lurched awkwardly, then fell off the edge of the cart and into the sand. "You been drinking?" Rory asked. "What's wrong with you?" He leaned over me and looked into my eyes, frowning. His gaze travelled over my body, and then he abruptly stopped, a look of horror shadowing his face. "You bonded with the dragon," he whispered. He grabbed my bad arm and held my hand up for inspection, then turned my palm so I could see. A bloody rune was engraved into my flesh. His words took a moment to register. I bonded with Sion. Excitement washed over me, followed by the fear that Rory was going to kill me. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm ruined. Ruined!" Rory stood up and glared down at me, the anger evident on his face. I forced my mouth to move and managed to say, "I didn't mean to." That was mostly true. While I had been hoping that Sion would bond with me, that wasn't exactly what I had been expecting to happen just now. Strength was slowly beginning to seep back into my muscles. "I'm a dead man," Rory muttered to himself. "He'll kill me. He'll kill all of us. You fool! You blasted fool!" A lance of sharp pain shot through my ribs as Rory delivered a vicious kick to my side. I grunted and tried to roll away, but I still couldn't move. He kicked me again, harder. Rory must have been yelling loudly, because Vance and Jeff showed up, wiping sleep from their eyes. "What's going on?" Vance asked, stepping between Rory and I. "Why are you hitting my guard?" "Eldwin here was in the cart with the dragon. He's bonded with it." Vance didn't immediately respond. I could only imagine what they were thinking. I was just glad Vance had stepped between us and Rory wasn't kicking me anymore. Sion growled menacingly from within the cart. "Go get the wizard," Rory ordered Jeff. He rushed off to obey. Finally, Vance turned around and looked at me. I could see the disappointment, but it was much more veiled than his anger. "He's killed us," Rory swore. "Let's see what the wizard says," Vance replied. Jeff returned a moment later, the sleepy wizard in tow. "I thought you said your spells were supposed to keep anyone from messing with the dragon," Rory said. No. They're only to keep the dragon from escaping." "Why?" "Eldwin's bonded with it." The wizard looked at me. I had rarely seen him the entire trip and didn't even know his name, but he scared me for the simple fact that he was a spellcaster. "Can you reverse it?" Rory asked. "No," the wizard replied. "A dragon bond is a lifelong connection." "We're dead," Rory repeated. I didn't know who he was afraid of, but it was starting to concern me. Sion was doing something at the edge of my mind, but I couldn't figure out what. The wizard's eyes widened and his head snapped toward the cart. "It's unweaving my spell," the wizard said. He closed his eyes and began chanting in a strange language. "I will not be a prisoner any longer," Sion said, though I wasn't sure if she was talking to me or telling herself that. Rory closed the door to the cart and rushed at me. Vance tried to block him, but Rory sidestepped him and threw himself on top of me. He pummeled me with his fists, and all I could do was cry out. "I'll show this puny wizard," Sion said. Vance pulled Rory off me, and I saw the cart shaking behind them. The wizard cried out in pain and collapsed to the ground. Then the top of the cart splintered apart, and Sion's head and graceful neck became visible. She roared triumphantly and opened her jaws wide. I saw a flicker of light in her mouth, and it quickly grew until flames were spewing forth. Sion's fire engulfed the walls of the cart, and she broke fully free of the wooden prison. Jeff sprinted in the opposite direction. Vance grabbed Rory and pulled him away from the flaming cart, but left the wizard lying on the ground. Scion leapt out of the demolished cart and landed in the sand. Her left wing was on fire. Something inside me snapped, and I fought through the weakness in my body and sat up. "Scion!" I shouted, pointing at her wing. She looked, then screeched and drove her wing into the sand. I could feel her pain through the bond. Her wing was seared badly in one spot. I struggled to my feet. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I will be," she replied. I saw Vance returning, his spear gripped in both hands. I drew my sword and met his gaze. "Don't do this," I said. "I'm sorry, Eldwin, but you've left me with no choice. If we show up without that dragon, we're all dead." "I won't let you take her." "I won't let them take me," Scion said in my mind. "I'll die first." "I won't let it come to that," I said. Vance had a confused look on his face. He looked from me to the dragon, and understanding dawned on him. "It speaks to you?" he asked. He seemed genuinely curious, but I didn't trust him, and kept my guard up. "Yes, she does." And then I saw it, too late to react. Rory hurled the net over Scion. It draped over her wings, tangling them. She roared in rage and spun around, snapping at Rory. He stumbled and fell on his back, narrowly missing Scion's dagger-like fangs. With my attention diverted, Vance also charged Scion. He sprinted to her left side and slipped the blunt end of a spear through the netting, then ran under her belly and hooked the other side of the netting and twisted the spear in a circle several times, tightening the bindings. It appeared that Vance and Rory were the only ones foolish enough to try and recapture Scion. Jeff was nowhere to be seen, and the wizard was still lying unconscious in the sand. The other members of the caravan hadn't shown themselves. I guess they were hiding and wanted no part of the chaos. I walked towards Scion and Vance, trying to convince myself that fighting a trained soldier wasn't complete suicide. "Let her go, Vance. She just wants her freedom." "She doesn't get to decide what she wants," Vance replied. "She's a beast with an owner, and if that owner doesn't get her, he's going to do whatever it takes to find her." "That's not your problem," I said. "It'll be mine." "You don't know him, or what he's capable of. Trust me when I say you don't want this problem." "I don't have a choice now," I said, switching my sword to my left hand and holding up my right palm for him to see. The rune was still sore, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. Vance and I stared at one another for a long moment. Scion stood completely still, waiting to see what I was going to do. I felt her approval through our bond. "I wish things would have gone differently," Vance said. "I really do." He released his spear and made a mad dash toward me. I quickly tossed the sword back into my other hand and rushed forward to meet him. He was way more experienced in battle than I was, and as we neared each other, he quickly disarmed me by grabbing my wrist and twisting it. I gasped and dropped my blade. Then he hauled his free hand back and punched me right in the jaw. I staggered back from the blow, fire burning through my face. My eyes watered and I blinked rapidly to clear them, but not before Vance struck me another blow. I went down, falling hard in the sand. Vance towered over me, a grim look on his face. I knew he was going to kill me. He'd probably killed many men, and he wouldn't think twice about killing another one. "Prepare yourself," Scion said. Before I could ask what she meant, I heard a whistling sound. Scion's tail crashed into Vance, sending him flying, a surprised look on his face. I got up and retrieved my sword, then ran to Scion and cut Vance's spear free of the net. Scion flapped her wings, flinging the net free. I looked to where Vance had fallen. He wasn't moving, and I feared that Scion had killed him. I knew he would have killed me if it hadn't been for Scion, but I couldn't bring myself to think of doing the same thing to him. I shook my head and looked down at his spear. "We must go," Scion urged. I sheathed my blade and climbed onto her back. Without a saddle, I wasn't sure how to hold on to her, so I slipped my fingers between the scales by her neck and held on tightly. Scion lowered herself toward the ground, then shot up into the sky. I almost lost my grip, but I planted my feet against her shoulders and pushed myself forward, staying behind her head to keep out of the wind. As we flew higher into the air, I glanced down one last time at the caravan. A lone figure was barely visible. Although I couldn't see who it was, I knew it was Vance, and I knew that he would not rest until he found us. Chapter 6. Scion flew until we escaped the desert, and the landscape beneath us turned to woodlands. My adrenaline from the events at the caravan had long since faded, but I was still wide awake. Scion wasn't faring as well. I could feel her exhaustion at the edges of our bond, and knew that she would need to land soon. The sun was beginning to rise, and I spotted a lone mountain that stretched up from the ground, as if vying for supremacy over the forest that surrounded it. At the base of the mountain, lines of smoke wafted into the air from what appeared to be a village. It was hard to tell from the distance, but there was definitely more than one fire burning, judging from the smoke. "I need to land," Scion told me. "My wing hurts, and I don't think I can make it much farther." "Land near the mountain if you can," I shouted, loud enough for her to hear. "I'll do better than that. I'll get us to that cave." "What cave?" I asked. Scion didn't reply. She began to descend, and my stomach rolled. My fingers were cramped and numb, but I held on with all my strength. The mountain got closer, and Scion waited until the last second to swoop upward, flying just above the treetops. Scion's momentum slowed, and then she abruptly changed direction and landed on a ledge about halfway up the mountainside. Scion dug her claws into the rock and slid to a stop. I climbed off her back and stretched my legs, glad to have some feeling returning to them. "How did you know there was a cave?" "We have excellent eyesight," Scion replied. She flooded my senses with exhaustion. It made me feel like I was the one who had flown the whole way, and I nearly collapsed. "I'm sorry. I'm still trying to figure out how to close myself off from our bond, so I don't keep doing that." "It's all right," I said. "This is a learning experience for both of us." I stared at the cave entrance, not sure if it was a good idea to enter without knowing what might be inside. Not bothering to wait, Scion entered the cave. It wasn't very deep, only 30 feet or so, and there didn't appear to be any signs of anyone or anything inhabiting it. Scion slumped onto the ground and curled up into a ball. "I need to sleep," she said wearily. "I'll heal faster as I rest." "All right," I replied. "I'm going to find some wood for a fire and see if I can hunt down something to eat." Scion didn't respond, but her long sigh told me that she had already fallen asleep. I wasn't surprised, considering how long we'd flown. I watched her dark outline rise and fall rhythmically for a long while, then silently walked out to the ledge. The view that stretched out before me was breathtaking, though it didn't compare to the view from Scion's back. I glimpsed the smoke lines from the village and decided not to go near it unless I had to. There was no telling if they were human, especially being this secluded. I collected a few fallen branches that were near the ledge, but it wasn't going to be enough to keep a fire going for long, so I made my way carefully down the mountainside, collecting as much wood as I could manage without struggling back up to the cave. After a few trips, I noticed that there was no signs of wildlife. I assumed that Scion's presence may have scared away anything that might frequent the area, but then I noticed the lack of birds too. It was odd, but I didn't put too much thought into it. Once I was satisfied with the amount of wood I'd collected, I started a fire and sat beside it. The sun was up now, but it was still early in the morning, and there was a slight chill in the air. My stomach groaned with hunger, but I ignored it. I'd gone days without eating before, so a few hours weren't going to kill me. Eventually, I felt Sion's mind become active through the bond. The feeling was almost like having another conscience, one that was so foreign compared to my own. "How is your wing?" I asked, as Sion emerged from the darkness of the cave. "Not good. Some of the lesser burns are gone, but there is a spot that defies the healing process." I stood up and walked over to her to inspect it. When she lowered her left wing, my eyes widened in horror. There was a large black spot near the uppermost part of her wing. It looked like burned parchment, and small pieces of her seared flesh were barely attached. A large crack ran the length of the blackness, and it was bloody. "That looks bad," I said. "What can I do to help?" "Unless you are a healer, there is nothing you can do. It will take some time, but it will eventually heal." "How much time? I didn't find any animals near here, and we can't survive without food." "I can't be certain, but at least a week. The burn is deep, and I am still tired." "A week? We couldn't stay here that long without food and water was more important than food, and I hadn't seen any streams." "We can't stay here," I said. "What do you suggest?" I considered our predicament. There was no options. Then again, "I could go down to the village to see if they have a healer. If so, then we can get your wing healed and be on our way. We could find somewhere else to stay." It was obvious Sion didn't like the idea. Her displeasure echoed through the bond. Although we were still getting to know each other, she was already protective of me. "It's not ideal, but I suppose we don't have any choice. If anything happens to you, I'll crawl my way down there and burn the place to ash." I laughed. "I believe you. I'll get back here as soon as I can, if I'm not back by nightfall." "Village of ash," Sion said. I didn't reply. I wasn't sure if she would literally destroy an entire village for me, but I didn't think it would be wise for her to go down to the village with her injury. She'd only end up hurting herself worse. I started down the mountain, keeping the lines of smoke to my right as a marker, so that I could find my way back up to the ledge later. It took roughly an hour to reach the bottom of the mountain, but I knew it would take longer going back up. I looked at my surroundings and I found a large rock that I could use to remember where I'd come down at. I used my sword to scratch a large X on the surface, then headed toward the smoke. As I came within sight of the village, my uneasiness started to calm. The people were human. A few children were running about, playing a game together. Adults were working, and I could hear the ring of steel coming from a forge. I left the edge of the forest and entered the village, receiving odd looks from the people I passed. The place was bigger than I expected, but I wasn't seeing a healer's building. A young child ran around a corner and collided into me. I smiled at her, knowing it was an accident. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "It's all right. Can you tell me if your village has a healer?" The girl nodded. "Yes, the elder Alton is a healer." "Can you tell me where I can find him?" I asked. "His shop is there." The girl pointed to a building on my left. I had seen it, but it lacked a sign and was otherwise unadorned. I had assumed it was someone's home. I thanked the girl and walked over to the building, pausing at the door. I glanced around at the other buildings and shrugged, then pushed open the door. A wave of warmth washed over me as I stepped inside. There was a fire burning in the fireplace, and an older man was sitting in a chair in front of it. Shelves lined the walls, covered with bottles of all shapes and colours. The man turned and I offered a wave. "I was told you are a healer," I said. The man rose slowly and made his way over to me. "That I am," he replied. "My name is Alton. We don't get many strangers out here. What brings you?" Alton was taller than me, and his short hair was grey with age. He had a long white beard that was neatly trimmed, and his eyes were light green. "I'm just passing through," I said. "I need something for a burn. Do you have anything for that?" "A burn, you say? Yes, I believe so." He began searching his shelves and grabbed a bottle, then presented it to me. "This should work." The amount of liquid in the bottle didn't seem like it was going to be enough to cover Sion's burn. "Do you have any more than that?" "More?" Alton looked confused. "My boy, this would be sufficient to treat an entire leg." "I definitely need more," I said. His eyebrows rose curiously. "I can make more, but it's going to take me some time." "I can wait," I replied. "Very well. Have a seat by the fire." I did as he asked. Alton disappeared through a door behind his counter and returned a moment later carrying a tray filled with items. He set them down on a table near the fireplace and pulled a chair from the corner over. "You said you were passing through, but you didn't mention where you were going. Are you a refugee from the border?" "No," I said. "Oh, that's interesting. I hear there's been an influx of refugees from the attacks." "What attacks?" "The dragon attacks," Alton replied. "Wait, I'm confused. I thought only Osnen had dragons. Are you saying that Maida has dragons too?" Alton stopped what he was doing and looked at me, concern crossing his face. "My boy, you are in Maida." Chapter 7. I am. My uneasiness returned. Maida was the enemy of Osnen. It was the same place where the battle that had taken my father's life had been 10 years ago. The home of the false king, according to Marin. "Are you all right? You seem a bit pale. Are you the one this burn salve is for?" I shook my head. "No, I'm fine. The salve is for my friend. You said there were dragon attacks. Osnen attacked Maida." "Indeed," Alton said, "as they've been doing for years. Where did you say you were from?" I didn't answer his question. It was obvious he was trying to pull information from me. "What's in the salve?" I asked, changing the subject. "It's a mixture of pig fat, resin, and bitumen. Your friend is burned, yes? How burned? He may need more than salve depending on his injuries." "Not to be rude, but that's none of your business," I said. "Fair enough," Alton replied. "I just thought that I'd suggest someone who could help." "I don't trust him." Sion's voice echoed faintly in my mind. I was surprised that she could speak to me considering the distance between us. Granted, her voice was weak, but I still heard it clearly. She wouldn't be able to hear me if I spoke aloud, but that made me question if I was able to speak to her mind as she did to mine. Marin had said that was possible. I tried to tell her everything was fine, but I didn't know if she heard me. She didn't reply if she did. Alton finished mixing the concoction and added it to the bottle, filling it to the brim. I was satisfied that it would be enough. "How much?" I asked, nodding at the bottle and hoping it wasn't more than the paltry sum I had in my coin purse. "With the extra I made, it'll be 3 gold. I reached into my purse and withdrew everything, but quickly put the silver coin back. 3 gold coins were all I had. I rose from the chair and set the coins on his table, then grabbed the bottle. "Thank you," I said. "No thanks are required, my boy. I'm just providing my services." I left the shop and my stomach growled again, reminding me that I still hadn't eaten yet. With the last of my money gone, I couldn't buy anything, but perhaps I could figure out the best place to hunt. The same girl that had run into me earlier was running by, now carrying a wooden sword. "Girl!" She stopped and looked around, then waved when she saw me. "My name is Maisie," she said. Thank you for helping me earlier, Maisie. Can you tell me where the hunters go to find food? Maisie gave me a puzzled look. What do you mean? It was possible she didn't know where her food came from, but she seemed old enough to know that animals were killed to feed her. Where does your food come from? I asked. The wagons come weekly to deliver it, she replied. The people here don't hunt their own food. No, there are no animals here for them to hunt. Really? Why not? I asked. The dragons and their riders have poisoned our lands, she said. The king sends us food that isn't tainted from his castle. I stared at her wordlessly for a moment, not sure what to say. The Dragon Riders were poisoning the land of Mida. That didn't seem credible. Yet Maisie made two people who claimed the riders were doing things out of character. With troubled thoughts, I left the village the same way I'd entered and headed back into the woods. Something was wrong here. Master Peeves didn't seem like a tyrant, nor did any of the people I'd met at the Citadel seem evil. Granted, I'd only been there a short time, but the only wicked person I'd encountered was Curate Josephine. She had been an agent of the false king, working for a man called the Necromancer. I heaved a frustrated sigh and found the rock I'd marked, then started up the mountain. The bottle wasn't too heavy, but it hindered my climb because I had nowhere to store it. By the time I reached the ledge where Sion was, I had almost dropped the bottle several times. My hands were covered in small cuts from the rocks I had used as leverage, and my clothes were covered in dirt and dead leaves. I'm back, I announced, but Sion was nowhere in sight. She was probably sleeping in the cave, so I kept quiet and set the bottle down beside the fire while I brushed my clothes off. I wished I had some water to clean my hands with, but my shirt would have to suffice. The flap of wings drew my attention to the sky, and I saw Sion's red scaly body descending to the ledge. Seeing her in flight was magnificent. She was the embodiment of grace and beauty. What are you looking at? She asked as she landed. Dirt swirled into the air, and I covered my face with the crook of my arm. Nothing, I said. Where were you? I went to find food. Any luck? No, there is nothing here, not even birds. I noticed that too. The healer in the village said that the Dragon Riders have been attacking at the border, and another person said the riders have poisoned their lands. That explains the lack of food. If it's true, that's not what the Dragon Riders do, though. I wouldn't know, Sion said, settling herself beside the fire. The flames were dying, so I added more wood. I also got this. I grabbed the bottle and held it out to her. It's for your burn. Will it help? My wing flares with pain at every movement. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it back here before it gave out on me. You shouldn't have left, I said, not only because of your injury, but also because we're in Mida. The people here are the enemies of Osnen. Mortal politics have nothing to do with me. Except that they do, because you are a dragon, and only Osnen have dragons. You are their enemy by default, and so am I, which means we aren't safe here. The faster we can get back to Osnen, the better. Sion didn't reply. It was hard to read her emotions, so I wasn't sure how she felt about my words. Let me rub this salve on your burn. Hopefully the healer in the village will know his craft well, and this will get you back to normal. Sion lowered her wing, and I opened the bottle. The smell coming from her wing made my face scrunch, so I breathed through my mouth as I lathered the salve onto the burn. Sion made a noise in her throat, but otherwise stood stoically still. It only took half of the bottle to cover her injury, so I decided to save the rest and apply it after another day or two. Are you all right? I asked her after I had finished. It is soothing the burn, Sion said. Good. I know there's no food, but we must have water. I didn't see any streams on my way down to the village earlier. I saw water. It's further up, near the top of the mountain. The top? I glanced up. It seemed so high. I wasn't sure I could reach it. And if I did, how would I bring any back? I had nothing to put it in unless I emptied the bottle, but even then it wouldn't hold much. Not enough to make it worth the trip. I can scale the mountain, Cyan said, as if reading my mind. Maybe she had. I don't want you to hurt yourself, I replied. I'll be fine. Let's go now, so that we may return here before dark. It wasn't quite noon yet, but she was right. I didn't want to be climbing down the mountain in the dark. One slip, and that would be the end of it. Let's go then, I said. Despite her injured wing, Cyan made the climb seem easy. I struggled most of the way, my feet slipping off rocks, and my muscles burning so fiercely I thought for sure they would simply stop working. Cyan finally made me climb onto her back, and we progressed much quicker. We reached the water she had seen a few hours later. It was a shallow pool, fed by a stream of freezing water from the mountain's peak. The coldness felt good after the climb, and I drank until I was full, then laid on my back and stared up at the sky. The clouds overhead drifted lazily, their fluffy outlines taking all sorts of imaginative shapes. Everything I had thought my life would be was like a dream compared to the reality I found myself in. I pictured myself being a dragoon like my father, training at the citadel and following the example my father had set. The only thing that had been part of that vision that wasn't dead was being bonded to a dragon. Finding Cyan had been a surprise, and bonding with her even more so. I looked over at her as she basked in the pool. We stayed there for a little while longer before heading back down. Cyan offered to fly us down, but I declined and told her she needed to rest her wing. The climb down was easier on my muscles, though more dangerous than the climb up. When we arrived at the ledge, I found the fire had died. I restarted it and stayed near it for the warmth. It was early evening, but the air was already getting cold. It was somewhat depressing that we hadn't found any food, but there was nothing I could do. I had no money, and we couldn't fly back to Osnen until Cyan was healed. Cyan curled up behind me, and I leaned against her. Her hard scales weren't very comfortable, but there was a peace that she exuded that set me at ease and pushed the problems away. I stared at the fire, and it wasn't long before my exhaustion won and I closed my eyes. I only planned on resting them for a moment, but the next thing I knew, I was awakened by a throaty growl. I opened my eyes and sat up, my hand instinctively going to the hilt of my sword, which was still strapped at my waist. "Peace," Alton said, raising his hands. "I come in peace." "How did you find us?" I asked, rising to my feet. "I followed you after you left my shop yesterday. I apologize, but I had my suspicions about your friend. I thought I saw a dragonfly overhead early in the morning, but assumed it was my imagination until you mysteriously arrived." "Why did you come here?" I asked. He was older and didn't look threatening, but I had learned not to be deceived by appearances. "I've come to beg for your help." "With what?" I asked. "With saving our kingdom." Chapter 8. I stared at Alton, not sure what he expected me to say, but I certainly wasn't going to join my enemy. "You're not from Maida, that much is obvious," Alton said. "So I must assume you are from Osnen. You don't need to be skittish, boy. I'm not going to hurt you." After a moment of hesitation, and the confirmation from Cyan that she wouldn't let him move an inch before she scorched him, I removed my hand from the hilt of my sword. "Have you eaten anything since you arrived yesterday? As I'm sure you've noticed, there are no animals here." "Did he bring enough for me?" Cyan asked with interest. "What do you really want?" I asked. "I already told you. I want your help." I rolled my eyes. I'm one man with an injured dragon. What exactly could I do to help fight an army of riders? And why would I, anyway? Alton removed a sack from his shoulder and opened it. He dug around inside, then pulled a loaf of bread and a chunk of cheese out. My mouth watered at the sight of the food. I glanced at Sion, then walked over to Alton to accept his gifts. What about my dragon? I asked. A loaf of bread isn't going to do much to satisfy her hunger. Her food is on the way, he said with a smile. I retreated to Sion's side and ate, all the while keeping my eyes on him. A few moments later, the girl Maisie appeared at the ledge, leading a sheep with a rope. At the sight of the dragon, the sheep squealed and tried to escape. Alton grabbed the rope from Maisie and pulled the sheep forcefully nearer to Sion. Before I could warn Maisie not to watch, Sion snapped the sheep into her mouth. I heard the poor animal's bones crunch as Sion chewed a few times. Then all was silent. Maisie stared wide-eyed at Sion, and Alton shook his head in admiration, holding what remained of the rope. It's been a long time since I've seen a dragon up close, Alton said softly. That made me curious. What do you mean? Oh, I haven't seen a dragon up close in years. Not since the war against Osnen. Thankfully, I only see them from a distance these days, but they are beautiful creatures. I felt Sion's pleasure at his compliment. I see the salve helped with the burn, Alton added. I turned to look for myself and was surprised to find he was right. The large black spot had gotten smaller, and the crack in it had scabbed over. The pain is almost gone, Sion said. Good, I replied. I was speaking to Sion, but Alton nodded as if I were talking to him. Yes, very good. What do you know of the Dragon Riders in Osnen? Alton asked. I know that they don't poison the land or kill innocent people, I said. They fight against darkness and defend the helpless. Alton laughed. That's what I thought you'd say. You see, my boy, all of that is just what they want you to believe. They've been oppressing the people of Maida for a long time. I don't believe you. Whether you believe me or not makes no difference. All that matters is the truth, and I can show you the truth if you're willing to see it. I won't listen to your lies, I said. I was at the Citadel. I know what the Riders stand for. Do you now? Alton's smile faded. So you've seen dragons blast fire and lightning down on innocent people? People who've done nothing but live peaceful lives? You've seen their riders cut down people trying to make a living on their farms? I didn't want to believe him, but the tone of his voice and the passion behind his words made me question what I really knew about the riders. I did my best not to let my doubt show on my face. I've seen those things, my boy, and trust me when I say that I'm tired of seeing atrocities committed against my fellow countrymen. I'm an old man who doesn't know anything about war, but I know about right and wrong, and what the dragons and their riders are doing is beyond wrong. It's evil. I looked at Sion, wishing I could communicate with her to see what she thought about his words. She must have sensed some part of what I wanted to say, because she turned her head toward me. Do you believe him? She asked. I don't know, I whispered. Then there is only one choice before us. What? We must see the truth. I remained silent for a moment. She was right, of course. The only way to know if he was telling the truth was to see it for ourselves. What that meant, I didn't know. Show us, I said. It will require a full day of travel, close to the border, Alton said, and it will be dangerous. The riders have concentrated their latest attacks there. That won't work, I said. She can't fly with her injury. Of course I was lying, but he didn't need to know that. I can fly, Sion told me. She stretched her wings out wide. Yes, the salve has helped my body heal tremendously. Flying will not be a problem. Never mind, I said. She says your salve helped." "Excellent," Alton said. He turned to Maisie. "Go and get my mount ready." The girl left to obey. "You're going to ride a horse while I fly?" I asked. "Don't be silly, my boy. Of course not. I'm going to fly as well." I exchanged looks with Scion. Was it possible he had a dragon? It didn't seem likely, but I'd received a lot of surprises in the last few days. I shrugged at Scion. "Might I ride on her back to get down to the village?" Alton asked. Scion growled in reply. "I didn't think so," Alton said, smiling. "It never hurts to ask." "It could," Scion said. I grinned at her. "We'll meet you down there," I said. Alton nodded and left. I walked to the end of the ledge and watched until he was far enough away that he couldn't hear me. Then I turned to Scion. I was at the Citadel. The people there would never do the things he said. Scion regarded me thoughtfully before she answered. "What do you think of the people we escaped from in the desert?" "I don't know much about Rory, but Jeff and Vance were nice to me." "What of the wizard?" I shrugged. "He seemed nice too, but I didn't know him either. He tortured me with his magic. I was stolen from my nest before I could fly and taken to a place where others of my kind did not always survive the training they offered. You say he seemed nice, but I know he was not. The way we perceive things is not always how they are." Scion made a good point. Perhaps there was more to the workings of the Citadel and the Riders that I didn't know about. If they were doing the things Alton claimed, what could Scion and I do about it? We were newly bonded, and I hadn't been trained to fight from the back of a dragon. It was a slaughter waiting to happen, and yet I couldn't let them get away with the murder of innocent people. After an hour, I put out the fire and climbed onto Scion's back, sitting in the same spot I had when we'd flown away from the desert. Scion leapt off the edge and flapped her mighty wings, taking us down slowly. She flew above the trees and wheeled around the village until she found a spot clear of trees. Then she landed much more gracefully than she had on the ledge. Maisie and Alton were coming to meet us, and Maisie again was pulling an animal behind her with a rope, only this animal was nothing like the sheep. It was fearsome looking. The creature had the head and wings of a bird, and the body of a large mountain cat. Its hooked beak was several inches long and looked as sharp as Scion's talons. "What is that thing?" I asked. "You've never seen a griffin?" Alton said. "Never," I replied, shaking my head. "It looks like someone used magic to put two different animals together." "That's a good theory, but no one truly knows how they came to be. They are clever beasts, and rival dragons in their ferocity when in battle. They are one of the reasons the Dragon Riders haven't completely wiped out Maida." "What are the other reasons?" I asked. "You'll soon find out," Alton answered. "Where are we headed anyway?" "To a place of legend. It's the seat of the King of Maida, where we've held back the Dragon Riders for the last 10 years. "What's it called?" I asked. "Arafel. It means place of fire and darkness." Chapter 9. Arafel was a castle built upon the top of an extinct volcano. As we came within sight of it, I could see griffins, much like Alton's, patrolling the skies above the fortress, and massive catapults and ballista were lined in an orderly fashion outside the castle walls. A group of griffins launched themselves into the air from the courtyard and came flying towards us. Even though Alton was leading the way, Scion had tried to race past this griffin just to prove that she was the quicker mount, but the griffin easily outdistanced her. She eventually grew bored with the attempt, and the rest of the journey was uneventful. I was glad to see that Scion's wing had mostly healed. The thought of having to stay in that cave for a week with no food and no easy way to get water had not been exciting to me. Alton held a hand up and flew ahead to meet the approaching group. Sion slowed and hovered in place, her wings treading the air like a person would in water. I watched as Alton conversed with the others, but I couldn't hear what was being said. Finally, Alton flew back and the others went back to the castle. "Follow me," Alton shouted. He wheeled around and flew toward the castle. Sion trailed after him, and we slowly descended, landing easily in the large open courtyard. The griffins and guards kept their distance from Sion and seemed on edge. I dismounted from Sion's shoulder and felt the blood flow back into my limbs. I needed a saddle for her, but until I earned some gold, I was just going to have to deal with the discomfort. "You said you would show me the truth," I said as Alton walked over to me. "All I see is a fortress ready for war." "This is our last line of defense," Alton replied. "But this isn't what I wanted to show you. We're going to visit one of the cities that was recently attacked. Your dragon will need to stay behind." "Absolutely not," I said. "Please," Alton said, lowering his voice. "The people were just attacked by dragons. It would only add to their distress if they saw her flying overhead." I didn't like it, but I could see his point. I looked back at Sion questioningly. "Go," she said. "I'll be fine." "Fine," I told Alton. I bit my lower lip as I followed him out of the courtyard to where the siege weapons were, hoping I wasn't making a mistake. I consoled myself with the knowledge that if Alton tried anything, Sion would destroy their castle to get to me. We walked past the rows of ballista to where the flat top of the mountain gave way to the jagged, rocky cliffs. Alton pointed. At first I didn't see anything. I scanned the valley below, but I wasn't sure what I was looking for to begin with. And then a plume of smoke caught my eye, and another, and another. "That city was attacked yesterday morning," Alton said, "and yet the dragon fire still smoulders in the city." "This doesn't prove anything you said," I replied. Alton remained silent as he stared ahead. "I didn't want you to have to see it up close, but I suppose that's the only way you'll believe it." He headed back toward the castle, and I followed. Alton asked one of the guards to ready a wagon. I marvelled at the size of the war machines as we waited. They were much larger than they appeared from overhead. Once the wagon was ready, Alton and I climbed inside, and the driver led the horses out of the castle walls and down the long winding road that led to the valley below. I smelled the smoke well before we got close to the city. Flecks of ash drifted through the air. Alton kept his gaze out of the window, looking back the way we'd come. I'd been in a few fights, mainly with the bullies who made fun of my arm, but none of that prepared me for the sights and sounds of the ravaged city. The cries of the wounded filled the air, mingled with children screaming for their parents. Buildings were completely toppled, nothing more than crumbled piles of stone and wood. People wandered the ruins, their clothes tattered and covered in ash, their faces bloody. Here and there I spotted soldiers digging through the rubble. I swallowed hard and fought back the tears I felt threatening to overwhelm me. This was a nightmare. How could the riders do something like this? I cleared my throat and Alton looked at me. "Don't like what you see, do you, my boy?" "No," I said quietly. And I didn't. It was heart-wrenching. "Will you help us then?" "What can I do? Like I told you before, I'm one man. I'm not even formally trained as a dragon rider. I almost used her name, but I stopped myself. My dragon and I would be outnumbered and overpowered. Your presence alone would bolster the morale of our soldiers. Griffins are ferocious fighters, but there is only so much they can do against dragons. Having a dragon on our side would be a tremendous help." It occurred to me that Alton was a simple healer from a small village, or at least that's what he seemed to be. Yet he was talking like he was here at the battlefront, fighting with the king's army against the Dragon Riders. "Who are you?" I asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "There's more to you than what meets the eye," I replied. I thought you were a healer, but you have a lot of knowledge regarding things a normal healer wouldn't know." He smiled. "You are a perceptive one, my boy, and you are not wrong, at least not entirely. I am a simple healer by trade. I lost my son 10 years ago during the war. He and his griffin were scorched from the sky by dragon fire. Back then, I was naive about the events that were happening. I mourned my son's death, but I also told myself he had brought that death upon himself by joining the fight." Alton knocked on the wall, and the driver turned the wagon around and took us back toward the castle. As the attacks continued, and more of my friends and their family members were killed, I couldn't watch helplessly anymore. I sought out a meeting with the king and offered him my service, however he needed me. "So he put a sword in the hand of a healer?" I asked, skeptical. "No. Before I was a healer, I was a warrior. In my younger days I travelled as a sellsword." "A mercenary?" "Yes," Alton replied. "Then I met a beautiful woman who became my wife, and I put my sword away and settled down. And now I lead some of the king's men when he needs me. I was given a few days to rest away from the castle, and that's why you find me in my shop." "That was lucky timing, I suppose," I said. "My boy, there's no such thing as luck in my book. It's all orchestrated by fate. You were meant to come through that part of Maida as I was there. Everything leads to something, whether we see it or know it, or whether we don't." "I suppose." I wasn't so sure I agreed with his logic, but I didn't feel like arguing. I still don't understand what help I would be. And besides that, I would need to consult my dragon to see if she wants to help. "If your dragon agrees, will you help?" Would I? I knew that the atrocity I had seen was not something I ever wanted to see again, but even if Sion agreed to help, we couldn't do anything to turn the tide. Our bond was new, and we were still learning about one another. I knew how to handle a blade, but I wasn't a soldier, and I didn't know how much Sion knew about battle either. "I'll need some time to think about it. I don't feel confident in my abilities, and I don't want to make things worse for your people by screwing anything up." Alton nodded. "I understand your hesitation and fear. What would you say if I told you there's someone here who could help train you?" "Train me with what?" "With strengthening your bond." Chapter 10. After we returned from the ruined city, I found that a great tent had been erected outside the southern castle wall. Sion was happily munching down sheep and hummed in pleasure. Seeing that she was well taken care of, I followed Alton into the castle. He took me to a lavish room where I was able to bathe and change my clothes. Then I ate a meal that reminded me of the food at the citadel. Once Alton and I finished eating, he led me to another room, this one much simpler in decoration. It contained a table and 2 chairs, and was illuminated by a floating globe of light. I immediately recognized the product of magic, and wondered how different their sorcerers were from Osnen's. The room obviously hadn't been used recently, as there was a layer of dust that covered the table's surface. "I'm going to leave you now, but Esmond will be in shortly." "Thank you." Alton left the room, and I was alone with my thoughts. How did they have someone who could train me with strengthening the bond between Sion and myself? Was it someone who had defected from Osnen? Perhaps this person had seen similar slaughters to what I had just witnessed and left. Or had Alton's men captured the person? I would have my answers soon enough. I ran my finger through the dust, tracing a terrible drawing of a dragon with its wings outstretched. I started when the door opened and the man I assumed to be Esmond walked in. He looked like a walking corpse. His skin was pale and draped his bones like a sheet, and he had no hair at all on his head. The only thing that seemed alive about the man was his eyes. They were an icy blue colour, and stood in stark contrast to the rest of his face. "Edwin?" the man asked, his voice dry and whispery. "Yes," I replied. "And you are Esmond?" "That is what they call me," Esmond said. He slowly shuffled to the table and sat in the chair opposite me. He sat awkwardly, as if he weren't used to being in a sitting position. I found him to be odd, but perhaps it was just his age. "You have bonded with a dragon?" "Yes," I answered. Esmond tried to smile, but it looked unnerving on him. "I remember my dragon," he said. "It's been so long, I don't remember his name, but I remember how he looked. He was long." The man held his hands apart, emphasizing his words. "And he had the darkest blue scales I have ever seen on a blue." "What happened to your dragon?" I asked. "He died." Esmond's smile faded abruptly. "I'm sorry to hear that. How did you end up here, in Maida?" Esmond blinked lazily, his eyes glossing over momentarily. I assumed he was trying to hold back the tears at the remembrance of his dragon. "I don't remember." His voice sounded otherworldly. A shiver ran down my back. Esmond was more than just odd, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. A long sigh escaped his lips, and then he straightened his posture. "Forgive me," he said, his voice stronger. "I have been ill lately, and moments of weakness hit me sporadically. What were you saying?" His sudden change threw me off. "We were talking about your dragon," I said, "and I forgot what I asked." Yes, my dragon. He was a magnificent creature. We'll see each other again some day soon, I think." "Is your illness killing you?" I asked. "In a manner of speaking, but let's not dwell on such things. Alton tells me you need help with your bond." "Yes, I wasn't trained at the Citadel, and my knowledge of dragons is limited. We're both just trying to figure each other out." Esmond reached up and ran his hand back and forth over his bald head. "A bond, much like a relationship with a person, requires work. Are you able to communicate telepathically?" "She can, but I don't know how." "Close your eyes." I did as he asked. "Now search within yourself and find the bond. Once you find it, lift your hand." That was easier said than done. After what felt like an eternity, I sensed the bond within my mind. It presented itself in my mind's eye as a red sphere that pulsed intermittently. I raised my hand, but kept my focus on the bond. "Good," Esmond said. "Now, imagine that your dragon is there." I nodded. "Speak to her." "Scion." A confusing swirl of emotions and feelings rushed from the bond at me, but then everything calmed. "You are in my mind," Scion said. "You can hear me?" I asked excitedly. "Yes." I opened my eyes. "It worked." "You are a quick learner," Esmond said. "It will require you to focus at first to speak through the bond, but the more you do it, the easier it will become. Eventually it will become second nature to you." "What about closing the bond?" I asked. "Is there a way to block her emotions? Sometimes she overwhelms me." "Yes, of course. Most dragons learn from each other how to navigate the bond, but you mentioned that you were not trained at the Citadel. Is your dragon from the Citadel?" "No, she's not." "Interesting. Where did you find her?" I remembered the fear that Rory and Vance had regarding the man who purchased Scion. They were afraid he was going to kill them when he found out his dragon was gone. I hesitated to share how I found her, so instead I answered with where I found her. "In the desert," I said. "We saved each other." "A bond of necessity," Esmond said. "One of the strongest." I hadn't considered that before, but now that Esmond said it, I suppose it was a bond of necessity. Scion needed her freedom, and I needed something to give me purpose. We spent the next couple of hours going through mental exercises, most of which was to strengthen my communications with Scion. Esmond taught me that I didn't just have to speak with words, but I could also convey my emotions in a clean, non-overwhelming way. And with a lot of focus, I could even project images. Esmond said Sion was able to do the same things, but without another dragon to teach her, it would be much more difficult for her to master the skills. There are riders who can project memories to their dragons as well, but that takes decades to master. I wonder if my father ever learned how to do that, I blurted before catching myself. Your father was a rider? Yes, I said. He died 10 years ago, in the battle against the False King. I figured there were some things I didn't need to hide. The man had already taught me so much in such a short period. I figured being at least partially honest was the least I could do. Esmond leaned forward over the table. What was his name? His sudden interest was peculiar, but I answered anyway. Matthias Baines. Everyone in Osnen says he was a hero. Esmond sat back and his eyes grew glossy again. Yes, he sacrificed himself to end the war. I frowned. Are you all right? I asked. I think I need to rest, he replied. He closed his eyes for a moment, then stood up unsteadily. I got up and hurried around the table and put his arm over my shoulder, helping him walk to the door. I pushed it open and aided Esmond in walking down the hall. You're a good man, Eldwin. It's nice to see. He sounded winded, as if he'd climbed a flight of stairs, or sprinted. He mentioned being ill, so perhaps whatever he was afflicted with sapped his strength, or affected his lungs. Where's your chamber? I'll help you get to your bed, I offered. No, I can make it myself. No disrespect, but I don't think you can, I said. Esmond stopped walking. He inhaled a deep breath and his strength returned. He removed his arm from my shoulder and stood up straight. Go and find Alton. Tomorrow we will go over how to fight from the back of your dragon. I hope you feel better, I said. Esmond walked down the hall and disappeared around a corner. I had no idea where to find Alton, so I wandered the halls until I found a guard and asked him for help. He escorted me to a large dining room where Alton was looking over maps. 3 uniformed soldiers were with him, and they were conversing lowly. Eldwin, my boy, Alton greeted me when he saw me. Is everything all right? I nodded. Esmond said he needed to rest, and we would reconvene tomorrow. Ah, right then. Dinner will be served soon if you're hungry. You can retire to your room, or go see your dragon until then. What are you doing? I asked curiously. We're planning on how best to defend the castle. From dragons? I asked. Dragons? And the invading army heading our way? Osnen is invading Maida. It would seem so, according to our spies. That's above my experience, so I think I'll just go to my room, I said. Alton nodded and went back to his discussion with the soldiers. I left the chamber and paused in the hall. There was something about Esmond that bothered me. I glanced around. There were no guards around, so I headed back the way I'd come, and found the room where Esmond and I had talked, then continued past it and turned the corner Esmond had. It was another long hallway. Several doors were on the left, and a quick turn of the handles revealed they were all locked. At the end of the hall was another door. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open a crack and peered inside, not wanting to wake Esmond if he'd fallen asleep. Instead, I saw a room that reminded me of a curate's office at the Citadel. There was a large desk with books stacked haphazardly on it. A glass bottle sat next to the books, a glowing green liquid bubbling in it. I was about to go in and explore when a hand touched my shoulder, startling me. Are you lost? A guard asked. Sorry, I said, swallowing hard. Yes, I got turned around and couldn't find anyone to direct me. Follow me. The guard led me back to the lavish room, and I sat on the bed trying to figure out why Esmond's haunting blue eyes were so familiar. Chapter 11. An invisible force had me pinned to the ground, unable to move. I squirmed uncomfortably, but there was no escaping it. Something told me it was magic. A spell crafted to hinder my movement. I growled as I strained against it, but it was no use. "It'll fetch twice the price," a familiar voice said. I looked up to see Rory. He was looking down at me, greed in his eyes. How had they found me, and what price was he talking about? Was there a bounty on my head? I tried to demand that he let me go, but my mouth wouldn't move. "Yes, the younger ones are always preferred. Once they're older, they aren't as obedient. It takes longer to train them." It was Rory's wizard. What they were saying didn't make any sense. I couldn't move my head, but my eyes were free from the spell. I glanced down and stared in shock as I saw that where my arms should have been, there was a red wing instead. Panic swelled within me, but it was quickly replaced by annoyance as two men with pikes began jabbing me in the sides. I would burn them and devour their corpses. Wait, what? Where did that come from? I growled again and tried to spew fire from my jaw, but nothing happened. My heart was pounding in my chest, and fear rolled in my belly. What were they going to do to me? A knocking sound awoke me, and I glanced around, confused. I checked my arm and breathed a sigh of relief to see that it was in fact an arm. The memory of the events from the previous day drifted through the haze of my sleepiness, reminding me of where I was. The knock sounded again, and I climbed out of bed and opened the door. Esmond stood there, looking a lot healthier than he had yesterday. "Are you ready for your training?" he asked. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and covered my mouth as I yawned. "Not quite. I'll need a minute to wake up." "Very well. I'll meet you outside. Breakfast has been set on a table in the courtyard." "Thank you." Esmond left and I closed the door, then washed my face and put my boots on. I considered the dream I had and wondered what it meant. Using the technique Esmond taught me the day before, I found the bond and reached out to Sion. "Sion." "I am here," she replied. "I had a dream that I was with Rory and his wizard. They had me frozen in place, and I wasn't me. Well, I was, but I had wings." "Forgive me," Sion said. "That was a memory that I slipped into. I didn't know it would cross through the bond." "A memory? Was that when Rory's wizard tortured you?" "Yes, one of many times." Anger burned within me. If I ever saw Rory again or his wizard, I'd... "No," Sion said. "Vengeance is mine." "Fair enough." I paused, realizing Sion had heard my thoughts even though I hadn't directed them at her. It seemed our bond was getting stronger by the day. When I exited my room, a guard was waiting for me. He escorted me through the castle and out into the courtyard. I suppose my curiosity last night had put someone on edge, because we passed several guards at various points on the way that weren't there yesterday. A pavilion had been erected above a long table covered with food. The sight of steaming eggs, fried potatoes, and fresh bread made my mouth water and my stomach rumble. I had skipped dinner last night, and I would have regretted it without the bountiful feast that lay before me. I devoured 2 plates stacked to the brim before I noticed that Esmond was waiting on me. He wasn't eating, but I assumed he'd had his meal before I left my room. I wiped my face with my hands, then dunked my hands into a barrel of water and let them air dry. "I'm ready," I said, as I walked over to where Esmond was. "Good. Walk with me." I followed him out of the castle gates and around to the southern side where Sion's makeshift shelter was. It was a large tent for any human, but for Sion it was on the smaller side. Most of her tail stuck out of the side of it. She stepped out and stretched her legs, then her wings. "How are you with a bow?" Esmond asked. "I've never used one," I replied. "It's a good weapon to use on the back of a dragon, but you're not limited to one. I see you wear a sword, so I assume you're trained with it." "I'm not an expert," I admitted. but I can hold my own. I suppose that will have to do for now. Dragons rarely fight their own kind outside of the wild, so she will have to use a style that fits her. Unfortunately, it'll be hard for her to find one until she's in a real battle. I could have her practice with some griffins, but it won't be the same. At the Citadel, the dragons were saddles. Would it be better if I had one? Yes, which is why I had our leather worker make some alterations to my dragon's old saddle. It should be ready today, maybe tomorrow. For now, we'll practice on the ground. Mount your dragon. Sion lowered herself so that I could climb up on her shoulder. I positioned myself the same way I had sat on her before, and looked to Esmond for direction. Draw your sword, and stretch your arm out as far as you can. I did so, stretching to the right as far as I could without losing my grip on Sion's side. Esmond walked around Sion and stared at me intently. Move back to where you started, he said. Again I did as he asked. Stretch out again. I wasn't sure what the purpose of the exercise was, but I continued to follow his instructions. Move back. Finally he frowned. You don't have enough reach to hit anything other than your dragon's wing. Let's try with a lance. Esmond left us and went to retrieve one. There's something strange about him, I said. Yes, I feel it too. What do you feel? I asked. Darkness. He told me he was ill. The sickness will take his life. That could be what I sense. Illness is born of darkness. That's not what I feel, I said softly, thinking again about the familiarity of his blue eyes. Where had I seen them before? It's something else. Time will reveal it. Esmond returned, carrying a lance. It was over 10 feet in length, with a long steel tip at the end. He held it up for me, and I grabbed it. It was lighter than it looked, but it was sturdy and thick. Most weapons are ineffective against dragon scales, he said. A lance won't harm a dragon, but it will reach a rider if you come at one at the right angle, and with enough force, you'll be able to knock them from their saddle. That seems a bit barbaric and brutal, I said. Only the fiercest warriors survive battle, and it's because they're willing to forego their conscience. It may sound brutal, but when you are in that saddle and an enemy is coming at you, you'll find you feel differently about it. He made a valid point, but still, I'd never killed anyone before. The thought of having someone's blood on my hands wasn't exciting to me, but I kept my reservations to myself. We spent the rest of the day going through exercises. He set bales of hay up as faux enemies for me to strike down. Instead of flying, Sion would sprint toward the object, and it was up to me to strike them with the lance. By the time we finished the drills for the evening, my hands were blistered and my arms beyond sore. I ate dinner alone in my room and then spent some time soaking in a hot bath. The heat eased the tension in my neck and shoulders, but I knew I was going to feel the stiffness in my arms tomorrow. I clothed myself and opened my door. There was no guard present. Maybe I had been wrong about rousing suspicion. I stepped into the hall and closed the door behind me, then made my way back to the door I had found the night before. The castle was silent and mostly dark. Only a few torches were lit, and I grabbed one from off the wall and used it to light my way. Once I reached the door, I extinguished the torch and put my ear to the door. Nothing. I turned the handle and pushed the door open a few inches, glancing around to see if anyone were inside. Other than a couple of spheres of hovering light, I didn't see any movement. I stepped in and closed the door. The room appeared to be some sort of study and reminded me of Alton's shop. There were books scattered all around the room, multiple mortars and pestles, and roughly a dozen bottles and vials, all containing different coloured liquids. One of the books caught my eye, and I picked it up and thumbed through some of the pages. The text was written in a flowing script, but it was in a language I didn't know. I set it back down and walked over to the bottles, bending down to stare at the liquids in them. I spotted the green one from the night before. It was still bubbling, which I find curious. He has potential. I whirled around. There was a door I hadn't seen in the back of the room, and someone was coming through it. With no time to find a better hiding spot, I dropped to the floor and crawled under the desk. 2 sets of feet came into view. One set I recognized as Esmond's, but the other was a mystery. As do you, if you would stop fighting me. I will never submit to your dark will. If you haven't learned that after all these years, you are more foolish than I thought. Esmond's voice sounded strained. It will break one day. They all do. You've seen it. I have seen too many of your deeds. I grow tired, but I will not relent until the boy is gone from this place. I will not allow you and your men to subvert him. He will bend to my will, the same as you, whether by choice or by force. Eldwin is stronger than you realize, Esmond replied. He and his dragon are the keys to controlling the beast and unleashing it on Osnen, the man said. I will do anything to ensure he stays here. Whoever the other man was, I didn't like him. I tried to peer out to see what he looked like, but I couldn't see him without exposing myself. I wanted to leave, but unfortunately I was stuck until they left. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long. Esmond and the other man continued arguing. Then they returned to the back of the room. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then scrambled out from under the desk and exited the room. It was obvious Alton was lying to me, and I was determined to find out the truth. Chapter 12. After nearly an hour of searching the castle for Alton, I gave up and went back to my room. I decided that if he didn't tell me the truth in the morning, then Sion and I would leave. I had no idea where we would go, but I would not be a part of some dark plot. If the riders were attacking innocent people, that was one thing. But the man speaking to Esmond made it sound like something else was going on. And his voice gave me the creeps. I laid in bed for a long while before sleep finally overcame me. My sleep was plagued with nightmares. Dreams of being imprisoned and tortured by Rory and his wizard. Eldwin! Eldwin, wake up! Someone in the dream was calling my name, but I didn't see who it was. Eldwin, please! The voice was growing more insistent. Eldwin! My eyes shot open. I was in bed. It was still dark, and I was alone. Eldwin! It was Sion. I focused on the bond. Yes, I'm here. What is it? They're coming. Who is? I asked, worried. The riders. I can sense their dragons. I quickly climbed out of bed and put my boots on, then strapped my sword belt around my waist. Alton had given me a chainmail shirt, and I put it on over my tunic. I opened the door, expecting a flurry of movement, but it was quiet. There's something else, Sion said. The ground rumbles. The king's army. Alton had mentioned their spies told him the king of Osnen was sending an invasion army. If Sion could feel their approach in the ground, then they weren't far away. They'd come under the cover of darkness. That was clever. I rushed out of the castle and into the courtyard, looking to the sky. I didn't see anything, but thick clouds blotted out the moon. The dragons could be right above us. They're not, Sion confirmed, though they draw near. We should raise the alarm, I told her. Whatever you're going to do, be quick. The army ascends from the valley now. My eyes widened in surprise. We're under attack, I shouted. I ran across the courtyard, looking for the guards. One was on the wall, and he looked down at me. Sound the alarm, I cried. What are you going on about? The man called back. I don't see anything. Look to the valley. The guard hesitated, as if he was going to dismiss me, but he disappeared from view. A few moments later, a bell clanged loudly. The courtyard came alive. Guards came running from the castle, some of them still putting on their armour. Stable masters brought griffins into the courtyard, handing the reins off to soldiers. The giant creatures leapt into the air, dust swirling around in their wake. I left the courtyard and passed the siege weapons, heading south and meeting Cyan at her tent. She was wearing a saddle. It was made of dark brown leather, decorated with dragon heads and wings. It was beautiful. "They're almost here," Cyan warned. I nodded and grabbed the lance that we had practiced with earlier and climbed up her shoulder, awkwardly trying to get in the saddle. My muscles burned as I tried to get settled while keeping hold of the lance. Once I was seated, I lifted the lance into position, using my left hand to hold the heavier end. "I'm ready," I told Cyan. And just in time, the roaring of dragons filled the night as they swooped down from out of the clouds. Cyan launched herself into the air, her wings flapping quick and hard, lifting us off the ground and toward danger. My heart hammered in my chest, with both fear and anticipation. I didn't want to fight the riders, but if they were doing evil things, then I had no choice but to stand in their way. A blue dragon opened its mouth, and sizzling bolts of lightning jutted down, blasting one of the ballista to splinters. Another dragon, this one green, spewed acid from its jaws, melting cobblestone and catapults alike. "There's so many of them," Cyan said. "I've never seen so many of my own kind in one place." I had seen a couple of dragons during my time at the Citadel, but she was right. There were so many dragons wheeling in the sky that it didn't seem real. They were all different colours too. Blues and greens, reds and whites, and even a few blacks. Griffins joined the chaos and began flying back and forth, their riders shooting arrows at those riding the dragons. Within minutes, there were small battles happening all over the place. Below on the ground, I could see the army approaching the castle. From my vantage point, it appeared a long, thick serpent was slowly devouring the land. I hadn't trained much with Edmund, so I had no idea where I would best help. I looked down at the siege weapons and saw that soldiers were scurrying around, trying to load and fire them. A ballista bolt shot into the air, narrowly missing a green dragon. It bellowed loudly in anger and challenge, then dived down and landed amidst the siege weapons. Between the acid and its claws, it tore many of the weapons apart. "There," I told Cyan. "It's alone. Let's stop it before it destroys all those weapons." Cyan banked to the side, then descended like an arrow. The wind whipped my clothes and hair wildly, and I had to close my eyes because it felt like they were going to be ripped from my head. Cyan landed with a jarring thud, and I opened my eyes again to see Alton with a group of men running from the green dragon. I hurled my lance at the dragon, trying to draw its attention away from the fleeing men. The dragon turned to me and stopped. It took me a moment to realize it was confused, but by the time I made the realization, the dragon came rushing forward. Cyan ran forward to meet it, head on. I grabbed a hold of the saddle and hunched down. The two dragons clashed together, and despite my grip, I was flung from Cyan's back. I landed roughly on the cobblestone, bouncing once and striking my arm on something cold and hard on the ground. I struggled to my feet and drew my sword. The green dragon's rider had also fallen, and the armoured man was already up and coming toward me. Cyan was occupied with the other dragon, and the two of them clawed and bit at each other as they rolled across the terrain. I gritted my teeth and brought my blade up defensively as my opponent launched into an attack. His blade struck mine, and I was surprised when the force was less than I expected. I pushed my sword forward and to the side, flinging his arm wide as he held on tightly to his sword. The man was wearing a plate armour chest piece and sporting a helmet with a visor that protected his face. With his sword arm away from his body, I came in close and brought my knee up, slamming it into his groin. It barely fazed him, and I thought I heard a brief chuckle echo from the helmet. He grabbed my neck with his free hand and tried to squeeze, but his grip was weak. I slapped his arm away and backed up a few steps, then swung my sword horizontally at his head. A loud metal clang resounded as my blade connected solidly to the side of the helmet. There was a surprised cry, and the man dropped his sword as he staggered backward. I glanced at the dragons. They were still fighting, but it seemed that Sion was on the losing side. Her chest heaved, and saliva foamed at the edges of her mouth. The green dragon was twice her size, and had taken the upper hand. I needed to do something, but I would be easily crushed by the beast. I rushed the stunned rider, and struck him in the helmet again, then kicked his knee. The man collapsed to the ground, and I threw myself on top of him, using my knee to pin his arms down. "Call your dragon off," I demanded. The man squirmed beneath me, but he couldn't get the leverage he needed to push me off. I put more weight on my knees, and the man ceased his struggling, crying out as his armour cut into his flesh. "Call your dragon off." The man was stubborn and refused to obey. I jabbed my sword in between the cobblestone and grabbed onto the man's helmet, yanking until the strap broke and it came free. I tossed it aside and looked down. My eyes widened as soon as I recognized the face that was staring back at me. "Maren," I gasped. Chapter 13. What are you doing here?" I stuttered. "I could ask you the same thing," she grunted. "Get off me." I rolled off and offered her my hand. She glared up at me but finally accepted my hand, and I pulled her to her feet. She looked at her dragon, and with a silent command it broke away from Sion. The two dragons eyed each other warily. "So you managed to find a dragon of your own?" Maren asked, looking up at the sky. "I did, and you are part of the Citadel attacking helpless people." Maren turned her gaze on me. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen the destruction in the valley," I said, pointing. "Innocent people were killed by dragon fire. That's not what the riders stand for. It's not what they do. At least that's what I was led to believe at the Citadel." Maren shook her head slowly. I could see that she had stopped colouring her hair black. The vibrant red glimmered faintly. She was just as beautiful as ever, but her face was creased with concern. "Eldwin, we didn't attack the valley. We're here to try and stop the necromancer. This is his castle. Which makes me wonder, why are you here?" Her words give me pause. This was the necromancer's castle? The man responsible for Curate Josephine's death? No, that couldn't be right. But the man who had spoken to Esmond earlier, the mysterious man. A sinking feeling filled my stomach. "No," I thought. "What is it?" Sion asked. "We've been deceived," I told her. "It's a long story," I said to Maren. "I'll tell you everything later. Where's Master Peeves? I need to see him." "Master Peeves? You didn't hear, did you? He's dead." "Dead?" I asked incredulously. "What happened?" "He was poisoned at the Citadel a few weeks ago. Curate Anesco has taken over as temporary master until the Conclave appoints a new leader. Things have not been going well back home, Eldwin." "I need to speak with Anesco then. Where is he?" "I'll take you to him," Maren said. "Follow me." She picked up her sword and ran to her dragon, easily climbing into the saddle. She'd clearly had more practice than I had. I mounted Sion and waited until Maren and her dragon had leapt into the air, then instructed Sion to follow them. I searched the ground for Alton as we ascended, but there was no sign of him. I hoped he had reached the castle safely. He might be aligned with the enemy, but he had been nice to me and provided the salve that healed Sion's wing. It was a moral dilemma, but I owed him. Sion reached the same altitude as Maren's dragon, and we flew over the chaos unfolding below us. The king's army had reached the castle, and the clash of arms rang out from every direction. An odd shriek sounded behind me, and I looked over my shoulder. 6 griffins with riders were closing in behind us. "We've got company," I told Sion. I drew my sword, despite knowing I didn't have the reach to do any damage. "Eldwin!" I barely heard my name over the wind. It was Alton. He was riding one of the griffins. I gritted my teeth and tried to ignore him. A large shadow zoomed overhead. A moment later, screams filled the sky. I saw a dragon drop suddenly, its rider falling out of the saddle. The dragon's wings were shredded, and it plummeted to the ground. I averted my eyes just before the dragon and its rider smashed into the valley below. "What was that thing?" I asked Sion. She didn't respond, but I could sense her fear through the bond. Whatever it was, it had taken out a full-grown dragon with little trouble. I scanned the clouds above us, keeping watch for anything out of the ordinary, but I should have been watching the griffins behind me. 2 of the birds glided into position on each of Sion's sides. Their riders had lances pointed at us, and I saw that Alton was among them. "Eldwin!" He yelled my name again. I turned to look at him. His griffin was only a few feet away, but it was safely out of Sion's reach. "Come back," he shouted. "It's not too late." Before I could reply, Marin's dragon flew up and did a roll, levelling out behind Sion. With an enraged roar, it blasted the griffins on my left with acid. The birds screeched as they fell from the sky, their riders having already melted to death in their saddles. Alton and the other riders quickly turned and fled. Marin's dragon took the lead again, and I kept a more cautious watch. The burned-out city in the valley below glowed orange with new fires. There were no sounds of battle, but the cries of the wounded and dying drifted up to my ears. I knew I'd been deceived by Alton, but the carnage that I'd seen was definitely the work of dragons. Perhaps Enesco would be able to explain what had happened. The flapping of wings drew my attention, and I turned around in my saddle to see Esmond approaching on the back of a griffin. I tightened my grip on my sword hilt. I didn't want to fight the man, but I couldn't trust anyone at this point. It had become obvious through his conversation with the necromancer that he was a prisoner. He'd probably been a scout or something and had fallen in battle only to be taken captive. "Boy," he shouted, "flee from here and don't come back." "I don't plan on it," I yelled back. "If you do, you'll regret it. He'll enslave you with his magic. Warn the others. Retreat now while you can. He's raised a beast that cannot be defeated." He must have been talking about the shadow that had taken out the dragon. I raised my sword to him. "I'll tell them." "Forgive me," Esmond shouted. Forgive him? For what? Thinking back over the last 2 days, he hadn't done anything but train me. In fact, he helped teach me to better communicate with Sion. We passed the edge of the burned-out valley below, and I watched in horror as Esmond was thrown from his mount by some unseen barrier. The griffin continued flying as if nothing had happened, but Esmond fell through the sky into the darkness below. "We have to turn around," I screamed at Sion. She didn't reply, nor did she change direction. "Sion, please." I realized something was blocking our connection. I could feel it in the way, some sort of invisible web tangled over the bond. I mentally clawed at it, trying to reach Sion's mind. It was too strong, and I gave up in frustration. A wailing cry filled the air. I looked back, expecting to see a griffin or the shadowy beast, but there was nothing. The sound faded, and the night went quiet. We left the valley behind us, and as the sun was beginning to rise, I could make out the camp that Marin was leading me to. Finding Marin was a surprise, and I had 100 questions that needed to be answered. On top of all that, for some reason I couldn't explain, I felt as if I had abandoned Esmond to death. End of Book 2. This has been A Bond of Flame, Dragon Riders of Osnen, Book 2. Written by Richard Fierce. Narrated by Andrew McDermott. Copyright 2020 by Richard Fierce. Production copyright by Richard Fierce.